Good morning. My name is Naomi Lopez. I'm a senior political science and international relations major here at Carleton College. I'll be introducing today's convocation speaker, Professor Joe Uscinski. I'm excited to learn from Professor Uscinski today, as I've been intrigued by his work for a few years. I engaged with much of his research as part of my COMPS project, which examines racialized conspiracy theories targeting female BIPOC members of Congress. I'm grateful for his contributions to conspiracy scholarship, which have shaped my own studies. Having Professor Uscinski speak to us today also gives me the opportunity to put a face and voice to the citation. Uscinski earned his bachelor's degree from Plymouth State University, his master's from the University of New Hampshire, and his doctorate from the University of Arizona. He joins us today from the Political Science Department at the University of Miami. Uscinski is one of the foremost experts on conspiracy theories and the people who believe them. Most recently, he was named a Lifetime Fellow at the Center for Scientific Inquiry for his conspiracy research. For over a decade, Uscinski has been polling Americans about their beliefs in conspiracy theories, keeping a pulse on the evolving ways in which misinformation impacts the American political life. His research has helped us answer critical questions of why people believe in conspiracy theories, when, and to what effect. He is the author of the first textbook on conspiracy theories, Conspiracy Theories, a Primer, and co-author of American Conspiracy Theories, which is widely considered the foundational study of modern conspiracies. In regard to his ongoing scholarship, he is currently writing a book that explains conspiracy theories in the Trump era. Uscinski's research and views have been extensively covered at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, Newsweek, and Politico. He has appeared as a guest on NPR, CBS, BBC, and numerous other national and international outlets. Recently, he appeared in HBO's Q, Into the Storm, a documentary about QAnon. It is my honor to welcome Professor Uscinski to Carleton College as he shares his work on conspiracy theories, why people believe them, and solutions we can employ to mitigate their harmful effects. Please help me in welcoming him onto the stage.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. This is the sort of town that I went to college in and grew up in. I'm not originally from Miami. I'm from New Hampshire, so this is, even though this is very cold to my now thinned blood, being in Miami for 15 years, this is what I grew up with. So thank you. And it's good to be here among new friends and old. And I do want to say I have been working extensively with one of the faculty members here, Dr. Farhart, in your political science department. And some of what I'm going to talk about today is going to speak to that research. So thank you. So the media's talked a lot about conspiracy theories lately. When I first started looking at the topic, reporters barely wrote about it 10 years ago. And now there's stories coming out every day about the new conspiracy theory or how widespread these theories are. So what is the media saying? So The Economist says, just recently, from the Congo to the Capitol, conspiracy theories are surging. The pandemic and politics have given us the golden age of conspiracy theorizing. And the Washington Post is concerned that you might fall down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. And yes, this is the Washington Post and not Cosmo, but regardless, they want you to take the quiz and find out if you've become a conspiracy theorist. So in all media narratives, there has to be a villain. So what is the villain here? If you've been paying attention to the headlines, it seems fairly obvious. It's social media. Conspiracy theories are flooding social media and they're spreading everywhere. For example, we've had conspiracy theories about Bill Gates and population control and vaccines going across social media. And if you remember back to the beginning of the pandemic, which seems like decades ago now, that pandemic video was searing across our online networks and supposedly convincing people that the pandemic was really a plandemic planned in advance. And what's the problem with this? Well, besides that these ideas are infecting our politics, they are tearing our families apart, and something should be done. So when I say the media has picked a villain, I'm not being hyperbolic. This is The Guardian looking at Mark Zuckerberg saying, he's not just a villain, he's a Bond villain. And if he catches your kids early, he's going to have them for life. So a narrative is formed in the media about conspiracy theories, and that is that these beliefs are increasing in the populace, and social media use is the most proximate cause of this increase. The public is convinced of this narrative. So polls show that 70% of Americans, when asked about conspiracy theories, think that these beliefs are out of control. 60% think that Americans believe conspiracy theories more than they did 25 years prior. And the vast majority of Americans think that social media is to blame for this increase. So this has led to numerous calls for restrictive policies to deal with this problem of conspiracy theorizing. So typical op-eds say it's time for Congress to hold social media companies liable for the conspiracy theories online. And Congress has acted in kind and drafted many bills to censor or ban conspiracy theories from online networks. Even President Joe Biden in the last few months has made several proclamations about social media platforms and conspiracy theories, calling the platforms immoral, saying that they're killing people because of the conspiracy theories online, and just last week he proclaimed it has to stop. So there are serious concerns to be had about conspiracy theorizing. I mean, these ideas can encourage dubious beliefs, they can lead to distrust of our important societal institutions, and they can even drive dangerous actions. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, people were burning down 5G cell towers, and we've seen people engage in violence based on their conspiratorial beliefs. But at the same time, doing something about it, particularly when doing something involves government legislation, there are serious implications. I mean, regulating technology can decrease innovation. Regulating our online markets can lead to price increases and decreases of choice. It's by no accident that Facebook is more than happy to help Congress draft the legislation that will then tell Facebook how to act. But most important to me is that anything that Congress does in this area will regulate our free speech and potentially violate our First Amendment rights. So any law that tries to address conspiracy theories is going to potentially chill speech. It's going to engage in collateral damage because many of the ideas that will be taken down on social media may be valuable or even true, but just get taken down because the algorithms will identify them as conspiracy theories. And one thing we have to be very careful of is that no matter how well-intentioned, any law aimed at censoring speech will often be taken up by people who don't have good intentions and who will be driven to act with those laws to take down speech that isn't necessarily false or conspiratorial, but just not engaged in a very positive view of them. So we have to be very careful. So in this talk, I want to quickly define what I mean by the term conspiracy theory, explain in broad strokes why people might believe them, compare the media narratives that I've just talked about to the available evidence that I've gathered, and then talk about the discrepancies. So a conspiracy is what we call when a small group of powerful people works in secret for their own benefit against the common good and in a way that undermines our bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. Conspiracies are real and they happen all too often. You know, the best example of this is Richard Nixon working with his associates to undermine the Constitution and what's commonly known as Watergate. We know this happened because people made admission in open court, they went to jail, the FBI and Congress investigated, and the evidence of this conspiracy is available for anyone to see should they want to refute it. A conspiracy theory, on the other hand, occurs when you have an accusation of a conspiracy. So again, you have a small group working in secret against the common good for their own benefit, and in a way that undermines our bedrock ground rules against force and fraud. However, our knowledge-generating bodies have yet to determine that this actually occurred. So calling an idea conspiracy theory to me doesn't mean that it's necessarily false or crazy or irrational. It simply means that those who are best able to judge it haven't judged yet that it's in fact true. But it could be true, and we could find out at some point that it is. So the best example of this is Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories. If at this point you think that someone other than Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in the assassination, you're engaging in conspiracy theory. And again, it doesn't mean you're wrong or that the idea is false. It just simply means that it hasn't been deemed to be the most accurate explanation by the appropriate experts in this case. So why do people believe conspiracy theories? Well, it's a good question, but if you think about it for a little bit, it really devolves into a more general question, which is, why do people believe anything? And the answer is, for all sorts of reasons. We would like to think that we believe things because those things are true, but if you were to take your skull, open it up, dump it out on the table, you'll find a bunch of things that are true, maybe true, and maybe a bunch of things that are probably false, or at least dubious. So it can't be the case that just because something's true, it just happens to jump right into our mind. There are reasons that drive our choices of what to believe and what to reject. So I'm going to focus on a handful of those factors right now that will give us the most leverage in understanding conspiracy theory beliefs. So the first is our group attachments. And group attachments work in three ways. And the first is through motivated reasoning. People like to think that their group is good in doing just things, and the competing groups are the ones up to no good. They're bad. So it just makes sense that whatever we see about the world, we could say, well, it's the other side that's to blame. It's the other side that's conspiring against us. We're the innocent victims. They're the ones who do it. And of course, we often find when we poll people about their conspiracy theories that they tend to believe in politics that it's the other side, it's the other party. They're the ones who are to blame, never us. So what we find is that people tend to hold to a higher standard ideas that impugn their own group, but to a much lower standard ideas that impugn the competing groups. Elite cues also drive what we believe. So if our trusted leaders in government or in the media tell us that a conspiracy happens to be going on, then we're going to be likely to believe that particular theory. And sure, we can conjure up in our mind political leaders who have recently engaged in conspiracy theories. For people who trust those leaders, they're going to believe those theories, and that has a very strong impact on what people believe. And then finally, for group attachments, political circumstances matter. So after an election, who thinks the election was rigged? Never the winners. In politics, as in sports, winners of a sporting match, whatever it is, never complain about the referees. It's only the losers. And we tend to find that. And as things go on after elections, who do you think has the rosiest outlook? Well, the people in power. You know, if your president is the one who's running the country right now, well, things are going pretty good. Things are headed in the right direction. If it's the other side that has power, then, oh, things are headed in the wrong direction. Things are headed for the worse. So next is our latent dispositions. So what's inside of us that helps us interpret the world? Well, the disposition I'm most concerned with is what I call conspiracy thinking. And this is a worldview in which conspiracies tend to dictate events and circumstances. Now, everyone has this disposition to one degree or another. So it's not as if there's conspiracy theorists and the rest of us. Instead, what's going on is that all of us can look out a window, and to one degree or another, we might say, well, that's caused by a conspiracy pulled off by people I already don't like, or not. Now, how do I measure this latent disposition? Well, I put statements like this onto surveys, and people can strongly agree to strongly disagree with these statements. So these are, much of our lives are being controlled by plots hatched in secret places. Even though we're in a democracy, it's just a small number of people that control things. And the people who really run the country aren't known to the voters. Now, you could strongly agree with these statements, or you could strongly disagree with them. And people actually, they don't all see these statements the same way. And what we're able to do is when people respond to these, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, is we're able to give them a score, which tells us sort of how conspiratorial they are in their thinking. And what we find is that the people who tend to strongly agree with these statements believe in lots and lots of specific conspiracy theories that we ask about on our polls. And the people who tend to strongly disagree with these statements believe in far fewer conspiracy theories. So we can get a score for everyone, and we could sort of see just how prone to conspiracy theories are they. And then the next factor is information environment. So what are we exposed to in the world? So what we see, what we hear about, the things people tell us about, all of that matters to a certain extent. But what I really want you to focus on is that how we interpret the things that we're exposed to is what really matters. Two people can be exposed to the exact same piece of information and come to entirely different conclusions about it simply because they have a different set of dispositions. And next is our personality traits. And, you know, everyone believes one or a few conspiracy theories, and it seems to be completely normal. But there are some conspiracy theories out there that are deemed sort of out of normal bounds in society. So you can imagine if someone says the Holocaust never happened or no one died at Sandy Hook. Those are ideas that seem a little bit outside normal, polite discourse. And what we tend to find is that people who buy into those sorts of conspiracy theories, they also tend to have conflictual personalities. They tend to be high in what we might call dark personality traits like psychopathy and narcissism. And that makes perfect sense, is that antisocial people are going to be drawn to antisocial ideas. And we shouldn't be shocked when people who engage in these ideas sort of act antisocially. And then finally, conspiracy theories don't really have official versions. In this sense, they're kind of like fan fiction, and anyone can make up anything they want, anytime they want, for any reason they have. And they often do. So oftentimes we're thinking about conspiracy theories in terms of spread, like there's an idea and it goes from person to person to person. Well, conspiracy theories aren't necessarily like that. People can make up anything they want for any reason they have, and they often do it. So it doesn't have to be the case that for someone to believe a conspiracy theory, it must have spread to them from someone else. People can just look out at the world and say, oh, well, that must be a conspiracy by someone. So if you put all these things together, you have a quite strong set of explanations for why people believe conspiracy theories or not. And what we find is that the explanations I just gave you are largely stable over time. People's dispositions and their group attachments are long-standing for the most part. And for that reason, we tend to find that conspiracy beliefs, as I'll expound upon in a few minutes, are largely stable over time. So, just for example, let's take the belief that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by corrupt scientists and communist people at the United Nations. Now, we get between 20 and 30% of the US population believing this. So the question is, why do they believe this, even though 97% of climatologists say, no, we're not communist agents, and no, we haven't been bought off, and yes, climate change is real and man-made and happening? Well, the reasons are fairly simple. It tends to be Republicans rather than Democrats who believe this. Why? Because Republican leaders have for 3 decades claimed that climate change isn't really happening, and it's potentially a hoax put on by people who want to harm the country. And which particular Republicans seem most prone to these ideas? Well, it's ones who have higher levels of conspiratorial thinking. So, given that explanation for why people buy into these ideas, let's think about the claims that we've heard in the media lately, and then see if those stand up to the evidence that we've been able to gather for the last decade. So, I think the most frequent claim I hear in the media is that now is the time. You're in the golden age of conspiracy theories. That's now more than ever. Well, is that true? So if it was, you would expect people would be believing in conspiracy theories more now than they have at any time in the past. And we should be able to find that with numerous conspiracy theories. So let's just take one example, and that's Kennedy conspiracy theories. So only a few weeks after the assassination in 1963, 50% of Americans believed there was a conspiracy rather than a lone gunman. By the mid-70s, that number grew to 80% of Americans. And that number's only come down in the internet and social media era to now it ranges between 45 and 55%, depending on how you ask the question. So it's just not the case that every conspiracy theory is going up, 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 and it's not the case that we tend to believe these theories more now than we have in the past. In fact, of the dozens of conspiracy theories that I poll on, Kennedy tends to be the highest, and I've never found anything that has ever hit 80% in the last decade. But that's just one example. So what I've done in the last year is gone back and re-poll 37 other different conspiracy theories. And I said, which of these have gone up relative to the past? And what I found over the 37 different conspiracy theories was that only 6 of the 37 increased over time. 16 of them didn't change at all, and 15 decreased, and those decreases ranged from 3 to 31 points. And across all of these conspiracy theories that I polled on, the average change over time was -5 points. So there just isn't good evidence that conspiracy beliefs are going up over time. In fact, they seem to be, on average, going down. But there's a different claim that gets made often too, and that is that people are just becoming more conspiratorial in their thinking. And just to read from one take on this in the New York Post, the argument is that conspiracy theories have never lodged this deeply in the American psyche, and they've never found as receptive of an audience. So maybe it's not the case that people are believing conspiracy theories more, maybe they're just more conspiratorial in how they think. Well, I've been polling on that for the last decade too, and from 2012 to 2021, again, we find no increases over time. People are exactly as conspiratorial now as they were 10 years ago in terms of my measure of conspiracy thinking. So again, no drastic increase in the last few years, precisely when the media has been saying there's a massive increase going on. So what if we look at something more specific? People are very concerned about COVID conspiracy theories. So let's take that for example. Maybe since the pandemic, belief in COVID conspiracy theories have skyrocketed, and perhaps it's due to all of the misinformation on social media. Well, I started polling on COVID conspiracy theories in March of 2020, so right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I've repolled those same conspiracy theories over and over again. So I started out with 2 ideas that seem to be the major conspiracy theories at the beginning of the pandemic. And the first was that COVID is being exaggerated to hurt President Trump. And the second idea was that it's a bioweapon meant to kill us. And both came in around 30% of Americans buying into each of those. But I went back and repolled them in June of 2020, then October of 2020, and then May of 2021. Again, no increases, completely flat. So what we found was that regardless of what was on social media, people either bought into these ideas from the beginning or they didn't. And there didn't seem to be a case where these ideas were just spreading to everyone everywhere. So during April and May, when the pandemic video caused a lot of concern, and people were saying, oh my God, this video's been spread millions of times and people are sharing it everywhere, it's going to convince everyone, we found no increases. So that leads me to strongly suspect that the only people accessing this video were people who are already in agreement with the claims made by the video. So beyond the two conspiracy theories I just talked about, I've polled on a whole lot of other ones and then went back and re-polled them all a year later. So in June 2020, I asked about if the coronavirus is being used to force a vaccine on us, if Bill Gates was behind it, if we were going to get chips in our neck. And I also asked about misinformation that was quite prominent out there too, like can hydroxychloroquine prevent or cure COVID? Is 5G to blame? Or can you spray yourself with disinfectant and protect yourself from COVID, which some people tried? None of these ideas increased from 2020 to 2021, and if anything, almost all of them went down. Okay, well, putting that aside, how about QAnon? We read a lot about QAnon in the last year. And almost all the headlines claim that QAnon is big and getting bigger. And oh my God, they're going to take over the country, and they've already taken over the Republican Party at least. Well, if you don't know about QAnon, it's the idea that there's a secret agent named Q giving secretive clues to their followers on 8chan and 4chan and other anonymous websites. And these clues pertain to a cabal of satanic child sex traffickers who controlled the government and who were soon going to be taken down by Donald Trump. And you might recognize this fellow, the QAnon shaman, from a lot of news coverage lately. He's in jail now for storming the Capitol on January 6th. So going into the pandemic, very few people knew about QAnon. I had run a poll on it in Florida in 2018 and found that it was neither well known nor well liked. Emerson Polling polled people nationwide in 2019 and asked people if they were believers. They only got 5%. And a Pew poll in March of 2020 found that only 3% of Americans had heard or read a lot about it. And of the people who had heard anything about it, most of them were hearing it not through 4chan or 8chan, but through the New York Times or other mainstream outlets. But did it get bigger over time? Well, in 2018 in Florida, I ran a poll where I asked a representative sample of Floridians to rate the QAnon movement on a scale from 0 to 100, with 0 meaning they really hate it and 100 meaning they really love it. The average rating was about a 22, so not a stunning endorsement. And just to put that in context, I also put Fidel Castro on my survey. And if you know anything about Florida, you know we don't like Castro, and we all danced in the street when he died. And Castro came in only a point lower than QAnon did. So again, no stunning endorsement of QAnon. But we went back and redid the same thing both in Florida and nationwide several times since. And the only thing we found is that support for QAnon has been going down rather than up. We found the exact opposite of what the headlines were saying in 2020 and 2021. So another claim that's made about QAnon is that it's a far-right conspiracy theory. And if you go to Wikipedia right now, that'll be the first thing that you'll find in the Wikipedia entry. QAnon is a right-wing conspiracy theory. Well, is it? What does the data tell us about QAnon believers? Well, in 2019, a poll asked, are you a believer in QAnon? 5% of Americans said yes, but it was 6% of Republicans and 6% of Democrats that said yes. So even numbers. I went back and redid this poll last summer and got 6% of Americans believing in QAnon, so no increase. And it was 7% of Democrats and 5.5% of Republicans. So again, no strong evidence that this is a far-right or even right-wing conspiracy theory. And just to put these numbers in context, the gray bar there is the number of people believing in JFK conspiracy theories, which on that poll was 56%. So when people talk about a conspiracy theory that's big and getting bigger, QAnon isn't it, and it's perhaps the least believed thing that I ask about on my polls, and I ask about quite a few. So, moving from, what are the numbers to what does it mean? I mean, is it the case that social media is driving conspiracy theory beliefs? It's time to clean up the toxic internet, says the media. Well, given what I've already talked about, there just isn't that much room for communication technologies to drive beliefs. And it seems to be the case that a lot of journalists and even a lot of people think that, we go out, we're exposed to an idea, and we immediately believe it. But that's just not how our brains work. People like to self-select into content that they already believe in. I mean, Republicans watch Fox, Democrats don't. They'll watch other things. And we have psychological filters. So even if an idea gets to us that we don't already agree with, we're likely to discount it. So it just doesn't leave a lot of room for things we see on the internet to affect us. And I've been studying this for some time, and it's absolutely true that people who use more social media tend to believe in more conspiracy theories. However, if people aren't already predisposed to conspiracy theories, it doesn't matter how much social media they use. They're just not going to believe a lot of conspiracy theories. If they're not predisposed, the exposure isn't going to do much to them. So what we tend to find is that self-selection is really driving conspiracy beliefs, right? And think about why someone might go to social media. It's because they can't get what they want elsewhere. They can't find it on the broadcast news or in the newspaper, so they're going to go to other sources to get what they already believe. So next is, are conspiracy beliefs driving health behaviors? And this is really important right now, given that we're fighting a pandemic, and it seems to be the case that people who believe conspiracy theories about vaccines and the pandemic tend to be the ones not getting vaccinated. And this seems to be sort of the model out there. Like, is social media driving bad behaviors? So there's this model out there that looks like this, a bunch of really nice people hanging out, then they go to social media, and then all of a sudden, oh no, look what everyone's become, and all because they were hanging out on Twitter. So you can see a very specific model that's taken shape in the media, and it's something like this. People go online, they're exposed to conspiracy theories and misinformation, they then believe those conspiracy theories and misinformation, they become vaccine hesitant, for example, and then they don't take the vaccine. But what I want to suggest is something a little more complicated than that, and that is that people bring with them a bunch of dispositions and worldviews and motivations. So they have psychological, social, and political motivations that drive them to seek out information and drive them to make health behaviors. And it's those motivations that drive them to, at the end of the day, believe or not believe in conspiracy theories, to be vaccine hesitant or not, and to take a vaccine or not. So it's just not the case that the belief in a conspiracy theory is driving them to not get a vaccine. Rather, it could be the case that they're choosing to not get a vaccine and then justifying that choice with conspiracy theories and misinformation. So we have to be very careful about whether the conspiracy beliefs are a symptom or a cause of whatever behavior we happen to be observing. So people have long-standing traits that are in place long before the pandemic and long before they had a choice to take a vaccine or not. And those are driving them to seek out information, to engage in health behaviors or not, and to believe whatever they want to believe about the world. And those motivations are driving them to seek out particular ideas or not. So there's a whole bunch of factors driving people's behaviors, not just, oh, they happen to slip on a banana peel, adopt a conspiracy theory, and now are making health choices based on it. So a model might look more like this. People are who they are, and if you find toxic rhetoric online, it's because it's toxic people going online and acting the same way they act offline. It's just we can see it better. And that's who some of these folks are. So why the disjuncture between the media narratives and what the data might tell us. Well, negative, fantastic headlines tend to sell. Oddities attract audiences. So I get called by the media quite a bit. Like, hey, did you hear about this new crazy conspiracy theory? I mean, I was on NPR this morning, as a matter of fact, talking about how some people think that birds might not be real. They are robots meant to spy on us. These are juicy stories, and the media likes to cover it. And of course, negative headlines work, so saying now is worse than ever plays right into that. Social media companies, we have to understand, are in competition with mainstream media companies, and mainstream media companies are more than happy to blame social media for the world's ills. If only we had more mainstream news outlets and not all this stuff on Twitter. Of course, message brought to you by the mainstream news outlets. Journalists tend to believe in hypodermic theories of media influence. Of course, that's good for them. They'd like to think they write a story and it gives meaning plainly to the people who read it, and they interpret the story exactly the way the journalists intended it to be interpreted. But that's just not how people work. People bring their own worldviews to whatever they're exposed to, and they tend to resist ideas that they don't already like. So, one final thing I want to leave you with is that there's been a long, long line of tech panics, leading back to the invention of parchment paper. Is that when there was paper, printing presses, novels, records, TV, cable, radio, board games, you name it, there's been a panic about it, that this is what's going to lead to the end of society. When I was 10, there was a panic going on about the board game Dungeons and Dragons, and that it was satanic and people were killing themselves, and this was leading to awful things in society, and we have to ban Dungeons and Dragons. And then it went on to the next panic, which I think was heavy metal music. And then it was rap music. And all of these things were going to destroy youth and end America as we know it. And that's still going on. But when you look back and see these panics happen over and over again, it puts the current panic that we have into a little bit of perspective. So if you go back 100 years, gloomy jazz songs blamed for suicide. When I was a kid, they were banning Pac-Man. It was just too dangerous to have Pac-Man. And people were apparently committing suicide because of too many novels. Don't read novels. Of course, what do we say now? If only kids could watch more TV and get off their phones, things would be better. And 20 years ago, they only said, if only kids would put down the TV and read more novels. But 100 years ago, it was, don't read novels. So, the good news is this. Things don't seem to be any worse than they have been in the past when it comes to people believing conspiracy theories. The bad news, though, is that things are as they ever were. People believe what they want to believe. They believe ideas that comport with how they already see the world, and that's why people do believe conspiracy theories. There are, of course, reasons we should fight conspiracy theories. Because if they're not true, they can, in some instances, justify bad behavior and sometimes lead people to act in ways that are deleterious. We need to push back against bad ideas at all times. At the same time, we need to keep the problem in perspective and understand what the real problems really are. And that is, unfortunately, us, humans. We make choices, we have beliefs, and sometimes we don't make the best choices or have the best beliefs. So with that, thank you so much for having me, and I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Hello, thank you so much for coming to speak.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, it seems like some of the conspiracy theories suggest stuff like climate change, and I think I heard you mention on a podcast once, believes that billionaires have complete control of the government, right? They're clearly false, but more mild versions are maybe legitimate political beliefs. Like maybe you think that climate change is less bad than it's being made out to be. And I could the beliefs spread and they're more extreme conspiracy theories spread? Or is there kind of a difference in these spectrums versus more binary conspiracy theories?
So great question. I think there's reasonable conversations to be had about all of these things. We can say that inequality is a problem in the economy without saying that there's a handful of cigar-smoking billionaires twiddling their mustaches, controlling everything, right? And we can disagree about what the problem is exactly, and we can even have disagreements about how to solve it, but none of that necessarily has to engage in conspiracy theorizing. Same thing with the climate, is we can disagree about what to do, and of course we can even disagree about the extent of the problem without engaging in conspiracy theories. Just unfortunately, these topics sometimes do devolve into conspiracy theories, and we're dealing with heated emotional language rather than the facts on the ground as they are. So it'd be good to sort of get away from that sort of talk. So take Bernie Sanders, for example. I mean, he's pointing out important problems. Yeah, inequality exists, we need to do something about it, and the government could perhaps play a strong role in helping alleviating this problem in some way. Saying that the establishment and the 1% are out to get him and everyone else doesn't necessarily help that, right? So I think there are factual claims to be made, and sometimes it's better to stick with those than the heated rhetoric. So.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering how your research informs two questions. One is the number of people that believe that Trump won the election. How much of that is motivated reasoning? How much of that is conspiratorial thinking, or a combination, or something else? Mm-hmm. And the second one is, to what extent is conspiratorial thinking something that's almost uniquely American? Is there evidence from other countries of different types of conspiratorial thinking, different levels of conspiratorial thinking? I study Latin America, and there's a lot of conspiratorial thinking in Latin America, though it isn't studied as much as it is in the United States.
So I'll take the second question first, thank you. America is exceptional in many, many ways. Conspiracy theorizing is not one of them. So there are some countries that are more conspiratorial than us, others that are a little bit less. We've been taking measurements across Europe and some other countries over the last few years. The work is just beginning, so I can't pinpoint every single country, but we're just not that exceptional. In particular theories, we are. Like, we have a fascination with aliens, and we've seen that play out over the last year. I mean, there have been CNN stories and New York Times stories about, oh, the government has information about flying saucers in the sky. And that's very American. I mean, Europeans are much less likely to believe that than we are. But you brought up Latin America. I mean, there is one country in Latin America that has a UFO fascination, and that's Argentina. And I'm not entirely sure why, but there it is. So they're almost on par with us in terms of our alien beliefs. In terms of the people believing right now that the election was rigged, there's something normal about it, and there's also something new about what's going on right now. Is that after every election, you get about 30 to 40% of the losing side who thinks that it was rigged against them. In politics as in sports. Because the winners don't complain, only the losers do. And I like to say, and this doesn't endear me to any conspiracy theorists, but I say conspiracy theories in that way are for losers. And I say, I don't mean it pejoratively, it's purely descriptively, but they take it pejoratively. There's nothing I can do about that. So after every presidential election, there's a chunk who think they were cheated. Completely normal. That's just how things work out. This election is a little bit different, because normally you don't have the losing candidate going on for months on end that it was rigged against them. You don't have prominent members of Congress going on for more than a year now saying it was rigged against them. You don't have the entire conservative media sphere saying it was rigged against them. So where we would normally have 30 to 40% of Republicans right now thinking, yeah, we were cheated, it's between 60 and 80%. But that's entirely driven by elite cues. The fact that we had prominent political leaders and prominent media outlets pushing this over and over and over again. It's being spoon-fed to people engaging with these outlets. And that's why the numbers are what they are.
Thank you. So when I was looking at your slide, there was an issue that sort of I felt was especially well exemplified by the Kennedy slide, which I was wondering if it is an actual issue. But as the Kennedy assassination, for example, fades farther into the past, it starts to become less relevant. People have less reason to think about it, and they have less reason to come up with conspiracy theories about it, and subsequently believe those conspiracy theories. And I would imagine the same would apply to any number of other conspiracy theories, which seems to be an issue because you can only survey one conspiracy theory across 2 times. And I was wondering if you had a method for normalizing that and taking into account new conspiracy theories which come into the vogue once older ones begin to fade out.
Yeah, so in the last few years, great question, by the way, I've polled on, I've lost count, but somewhere between 50 and 100 different conspiracy theories. So one way you can sort of address this is poll on just generalized conspiracy thinking, which gets away from the specifics of any particular theory and just tells us what's the general outlook of people, how prone are they to these ideas or not, and we find that that's stable. But in terms of the specific conspiracy theories that you're talking about, it could be the case that as the event a conspiracy theory addresses goes into the past, that people believe it less. Well, maybe. And there is some evidence of that, but it's not entirely clear that that's what's going on. Because with JFK, like you point out, it went up 30 points in the decade after, right? And it stayed that way for 30 years. And it only came down in the past. And this is one that's really interesting because Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories are always in the news. They're always releasing new documents. Oliver Stone has yet another movie about it that he's previewing right now. And every November, we're inundated with, was there a conspiracy or not to commemorate the anniversary of the assassination? And you flip through cable channels, and there's always some conspiracy show on, and Kennedy is always a topic of it. So it's not like anyone's forgotten that. Right? It's seemingly as relevant today and as salient in our media as ever, yet it's come down since it's high, and it's still one of the most believed conspiracy theories in the country. But for other ones, we do find exactly what you're saying. How many people think that Reagan had a secret deal with Iran to release the hostages in 1980? Maybe a few people, but most people here are probably saying, who's Reagan? Right? So in that case, it's going to suggest that you're somewhat right in some things, but there are other conspiracy theories that have been around for a long time that are still as popular as they were some time ago. So it's not clear that every conspiracy theory goes up or down with time. There's a whole bunch of idiosyncratic factors that are going to drive what's salient at any given time. And you can imagine if our political leaders got together and started talking about aliens, then those beliefs might increase, even though Roswell was, 80 years ago. Oh, oops, they did do that for the last year and a half. And we had congressional committees and military agencies talking about aliens, and all of this got into the news, and oh my God, I did find that alien beliefs did spike by about 10 points in the last few years because exactly of this. But there's nothing new about aliens, right? I mean, it's just completely manufactured by the people talking about it.
Thank you for talking to us today. I just have a quick question about kind of the difference between misinformation versus fringe conspiracies, and do you make a delineation between whether the people believe what they're saying, and does that matter?
I think it does matter because sometimes it speaks to people's motivations, and it matters because it helps us clarify exactly what the person's saying. So let me give you a good example. If I say that there's aliens flying around the sky, there's nothing conspiratorial about it, right? I'm just making a factual claim that may or may not be true about aliens from other planets flying around. If I say the government knows about the aliens and has their technology and is working with the aliens and is hiding all that information from us for some nefarious purpose, now I'm engaging in conspiracy theory, right? Because I'm talking about someone actually conspiring. Just the same if I say, well, Barack Obama was born in some other country, misinformation. If I say Barack Obama is born in some other country and is hiding it to take over the United States as part of some Manchurian candidate plot, conspiracy theory. Right? Both can be bad because if both are dubious and not, we don't have good reason to believe them, then it's important that we fight against both.
Thanks so much for your talk today. It's fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if you have, or if there are any constructive strategies for dealing or engaging with people who are like firm conspiracy theorists. Because it's one thing, like if it's your Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving and you only see him once a year and you can just like nod and smile, then you don't have to worry about it. But what if it's your spouse or your dad or someone that affects your day-to-day life, and you feel like they've really gone off the deep end, and you kind of want to, stop them in their tracks. But in my opinion, it's really hard it's not constructive to try and convince them that they're wrong because it only makes them entrenched in their beliefs even more firmly.
Good luck and God bless. So you might say there's two types of people that you could engage with, right? And the one is someone who has their heels dug in, and they're absolutely convinced of what's going on. Giving them a link or a fact check or a tweet or having a conversation probably isn't going to do all that much, unfortunately. And for the reasons that I've talked about. People just aren't going to change their minds just because you want them to. They're not going to change their minds just because you give them a new piece of misinformation. And for the people who have their heels dug in, that specific belief that you're trying to argue with is really an expression of something that's underneath. It's an expression of their personality traits and their worldviews, and those are very difficult things to argue with. If you're talking to a person who, I happen to see this online, or a friend told me about this last week, I'm not sure about it, that's the sort of belief that you can grapple with. And you can say, well, here's a fact check, or here's what experts say about that. And in those instances, you're liable to have a pretty good impact. But if someone is expressing something that's really important to them, there isn't much you can do about it. Just like you're not going to convince a Republican to be a Democrat. You're not going to convince someone with a fact check to change religions, right? So there are things that people hold dear to them, and it's just not the case that everyone is so open to influence in what they care about.
And we have one in the balcony, but I'm going to need you to shout it out because I'm really bad at conveying information.
So I'll use a personal example. I have a family member who's a QAnon believer. And for this person, they act the same way now that they did before QAnon showed up in their life. They had all the same beliefs, the same worldviews, the same personality traits, the same behaviors. It's just now they've adopted QAnon. And that's sort of the interesting thing. It just doesn't seem to be the case that the people who fell for QAnon were adverse to conspiracy theories, or you would have expected them to get vaccinated. I mean, they were acting the same way, right? So you could take away the QAnon, and they're the same person, with all the same beliefs and all the same traits and the same outlook and the same behaviors. And that's a really important point, is because I think in the last few years we're looking for something to blame. We want to blame some exogenous force. It's that QAnon, it's that tweet on social media, it's that idea that came in and changed this person and did something to them. But the problem is that person was the same person before. And we probably weren't paying attention to them very well, because we didn't care about conspiracy theories a few years ago. And we weren't talking about vaccines before the pandemic. So we didn't know what other people's views on vaccines were because we didn't care. We didn't talk about it. But now these things are front and center, and we're finding out who people are regarding these issues that matter so much now. So it seems like, it's an optical illusion. It seems like people have changed because of this exogenous force. But they're the same person. And we don't always want to acknowledge that. We want to blame it on something else. But it's probably that person just expressing who they've always been.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. I realize I have a two-part question, which I realize kind of sounds like they're leading into each other, but I don't mean it that way. I was wondering, kind of the first part is, what do you think has changed now that it is more mainstream? Because you were mentioning, like before, it would just be 30%, but now, the candidate, like Trump is saying it and the mainstream media is saying it. So what do you think, if people aren't more conspiratorial now, what do you think is different that now it's mainstream? And then also, how do you think an increase in partisanship plays a role in all this? Because if people aren't becoming more conspiratorial but are becoming more partisan, how does that play together? Thanks.
So when people become more partisan, they're probably more likely to not like the other side, and there is some evidence that that's what's taking place. So as people become more polarized, it could manifest in ways that are unseemly. And there is some research showing this, that in recent years, some partisans really dislike opposing partisans to the point where they'd be happy to commit violence against them, and that's bad. In terms of what's new with conspiracy theories, I often focus on what's the same, and I like to say this: there's nothing new under the sun, and there's rarely a new conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories you could sort of think of as like that game Mad Libs that we played when we were kids. It's the same theory, people just fill in a new noun. So it's like, oh, pandemic hit, oh, it must be Bill Gates. Whereas the year before that, oh, it's George Soros. And before that, it was the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Koch brothers. You can name whoever you want. It's the COVID vaccine that's going to give us a chip in the neck. But before that, it was the MMR or the Zika vaccine or you name it. So it's the same theories over time, believed by typically the same people, with just different nouns to adapt them to whatever the new circumstance is. So what's changed? Our leaders have changed. In particular, what we've seen in the Trump era, and really focusing on Trump and his allies in Congress, is that they've engaged in a lot of conspiracy theorizing, starting in 2015 when he ran, and that really brought a lot of this rhetoric into the mainstream. And the other party had to react by engaging in conspiracy theories too. And the media had to react by covering the conspiracy theories and talking about conspiracy theories a lot more now than they ever have in the past. And most mainstream news outlets have dedicated teams just focusing just on this, looking at what politician is conspiracy theorizing, what's on social media, who's believing what, et cetera, et cetera. So what's new is that we're paying attention, we care about it, and we have leaders who are engaging in it quite a bit, more so than they seem to have ever have in the past.
I think we can squeak in one more little question, and you're close to me, so you get it.
Thank you, and thanks for coming today. I work a lot with RFID technology, and so I get a lot of conspiracy theories about implants. And one of the things I see is there's people who believe, there's a government conspiracy, and then there's also people who think, I'm a target. I have already been implanted, or the government is actively targeting me. And I'm wondering about when you're looking at conspiracy theories, if you see a difference in who's saying the government is out to get us versus the government has already gotten me.
There are instances of people who think they've been implanted with chips and people who think that they are being followed or spied on. Oftentimes that is a little bit less conspiracy thinking. Obviously that's present, but there's probably clinical paranoia and other factors going on. But like you, I get the same thing. Like, you're trying to shut down reasonable thought, and you're in on it, and you're a government agent. And I'm like, yeah, if only they sent me checks. So, and with that, thank you so much. I realize that was the last question. Very appreciated.
Thank you very much, Joe. Did you have a concluding comment, or is that?
That's it.
That's it, okay.